Hello and welcome to this section. In this section, we will learn about database-related operations. This section mainly includes the following knowledge points. First, we will learn about database-related terms, then we will learn about database-related operations, and then we will learn about database prefabrication and import operations. Finally, let's learn the property of the database. First, let's go to the first point of learning database terms. The database contains the following four basic terms. The first is its record. Record refers to a row of data in the table. Each time we insert or submit data, we will insert a row of data, and this row of data is called our record. Then there is our field value, which is each in the database. The value in the grid is the smallest unit of data stored in the database. Then there is our field, a column in our data table. The data is called a field. Finally, there is our field name, which is the name of each field and its column. We call it a field name. Then we will learn the basic operation of the database. The basic operation of the database includes our adding field, modifying field, and deleting field. Let's open the editor to learn these basic operations. Here, let's create a new application called the basic operation of the database, and then click the Create button, so we can complete the creation of an application. Note that all databases can only be added in the backend, so we need to select the backend first, and then click our private database on the left to complete the addition of a private database when the backend is selected. Here, we can double-click to change its name, for example, one of our user tables, and we have completed the operation of renaming make. When we build a database, the first step is to set the column structure of the database, that is, the setting field. How to set the setting field? When we select such a private database, we click Add such a field in the upper right corner, and we can add a field. The type and name of the field are what we must fill in. Here is a brief introduction to the types of each field. First of all, the first text field is used to store string, type and data, such as our name, title, description, etc. There are also some seemingly digital information, such as our ID card number and mobile phone number. In fact, they should also be stored in text type, because their essence is a string, and they do not need those numerical operation functions. The maximum number of characters in this type is 65,535. A Chinese character usually corresponds to 3-4 characters in such a size. We can check whether the following is case-sensitive to determine whether we need to distinguish between case and case. Here, we can enter the name of a field, such as our name, and then click OK. In this way, we have completed a search. Create a text type field, and then our integer field. The integer field is used to store data of value type. It is required that the value must be an integer. Its value range is very large, but pay attention to the storage of mobile phone number and ID number. Please use in text type. Next, we have a numerical type. The numerical field is actually used to store data of our numerical type, but it allows us to have decimals, while the integer type does not allow us to have decimals. The numerical field corresponds to the double type field in MySQL. By default, the maximum integer digit is 15, and the maximum decimal digit is 5. Generally speaking, we use a field such as integer or numerical value, which is convenient for us to use numerical judgments such as big fish and small fish in query output. When updating fields, we can also use addition or multiplication. For ordinary text types, we can only use assignment. Then we talk about a resource field. The resource field itself is also a text field. Its pure type is a suffix address of a picture resource we talk about. In our SQL data in backend, it is also stored in a string type. If you choose to be a resource field, it is convenient for us to directly display a corresponding resource. The maximum storage number of resource fields is 255, and then we have a time field. The time field corresponds to the date, time, type and field in MySQL. It is used to store a specific time point, which can be accurate to milliseconds. The meaning of the time field is to provide time comparison. You can query whether the time of a time period is greater than or less than a record of another time during output. Next is our date field. The date field is actually a special time field. It is used to store our standard date, such as year bar and month bar. Similarly, it can also perform time comparison. Next, our settlement type system segment is used to store our structured data. For example, we can directly store an array or general variables in our hierarchical fields. Of course, it has a certain size limit. We should consider it. Then there is our field name. The field name is the name of the column. We can name it according to the information stored in the field. Usually, we can name it in Chinese, such as name and score. The field names in each table cannot conflict and cannot be pure numbers. Here we select an integer field type, enter an age here, and then click OK. Then, we can also click to add fields, such as another integer, such as me, then click Create to finish the creation of a database field. Here, we can click such a plus sign to add an index field. For example, if we want to search for an age, we can evaluate the age as an index field. Similarly, if we click a plus sign here, we can set a joint index. For example, in addition to searching for an age, it also needs to search under the condition of age. We should search another enrollment time. When we click OK, it will become a left-connected joint index, so it can improve the query speed of our database. If we need to query according to the conditions of a field, it is recommended to check such an option. Of course, if we add this index, it will also have its cost, which will cause the problem of relatively slow data synchronization and data insertion. In addition to adding such an index condition, we can also click the previous unique data button. When we check the unique data button, the data under this field cannot be repeated. For example, when we add a mobile phone number, we ask the user to fill in his mobile phone number and check this field. You can't add it again. Then, if another user submits the same mobile phone number, the latter user can't submit the mobile phone number and will directly return a failure. In addition, after you add an index, if you also check the unique data, its query speed will be higher than that of an ordinary index. Of course, if we don't need to add data as a and its index field, we can delete a series of contents here. Next, let's introduce our default fields. First, the first default field is our data ID. The data ID is the unique ID of the data. As a primary key index, it cannot be deleted or modified. It defaults to the natural growth sequence at the beginning. Note that if we delete a series of data, the subsequent data will not fill in the previous data ID. For example, we originally had 12,344 pieces of data. After we deleted 234 pieces of data, after we added a piece of data, it will become 5 instead of starting from 2. The next default field is one of our submitting users. The submitting user is used to record who submitted this data. If it is manually imported or created in editing, its submitting user will be empty. If a user submits while running, the user's ID is displayed. According to different environments, this user ID also has different types, such as anonymous user ID, mobile phone number, WeChat, Oppo ID, etc. The creation time refers to the submission time of this record. For example, the data we manually import or add is the time when we add data. Once a record is created, the creation time will not be modified. Then let's talk about our update time. The update time is used to record the time when the data was modified, that is, the time of the last update. If the creation time is equal to the update time, we can understand that the data has not been modified since it was created. These gray fields are automatically submitted and filled in by the system, so the database is updated and the submit action cannot write to these fields, but the contents of these fields can be read. Next, let's talk about the field modification of the database. When we select a field, right-click to click a setting field here. Of course, in addition to setting the field, we can also add a column in the front or in the back, move it to the next column, or delete the current column. It is worth noting that when we delete the field, we must be very careful. The structure of the database is the skeleton of the whole application. If we accidentally delete the field, it may lead to abnormal front-end application. Modifying the field name may also invalidate the object array reference of the front-end. while modifying the field order may invalidate the two-dimensional array reference of the front-end end. So generally speaking, before the establishment of application, we need to determine the data structure first, want to clear the setting of its database fields and flow out of the database location in advance for the pre-developed feature, rather than slowly carry out the whole database architecture in the process of development. Then we will talk about the prefabrication and import of the database, and the structure of the whole database. Generally speaking, most of the data of the database are submitted by the user at runtime and after preview or build. However, we can preset some test data in the editor, or import some fixed data, such as the winning number or business number of the lottery we import product list, etc. in HeCode. There are two methods to add prefabricated data to the database, including our manual entry and Excel import. First of all, let's explain our simplest method, that is, our manual entry method. We can click a plus sign here. After we click the plus sign, we can find a new piece of data here. Then we just need to select the field value we want to modify. For example, the name here, I want to modify it to Wen Xiaohong is 12 years old and enrolled in 2021. After modification, we can find that it turns green because it is still in an unsaved state. We can complete such a data filling by clicking Save Modification here. For the same entered data, we can modify it by clicking. For example, if we change the little red here into a little black, we can see that when I modify such a field, it becomes a green again. When I click Save to save the modification just took effect. Besides, we can add a series of data manually. We can also use the import function to import a data dot, but please note that one of its types is a string by default. If it is an integer or a numeric type, you can make your own modification here. Okay, let's go back to such a user table. Some students will ask, if I want to modify some data in batch, how do I do it? It is also very convenient to modify the data. Here is a simple demonstration for you. When we click Insert here, we insert a row in front. Its field name is our data ID, then we write the data ID here, for example, 123 here, and then change its name. For example, this side is called Zhongsen 3, this side is called Lisi 4, and then this side is called Wangwu 5, which is equivalent to we have made a series of modifications to the value corresponding to data ID 123. Let's save such a student information table. Please note that at this time, I click Import again, and then import such a student information expression. It can be found that it no longer adds a series of data in the back, but replaces the value of the previous data ID equals 123. The reason for the replacement is that I reserved a field name called data ID here. If there is no data ID, it will be added later. If there is a data ID, it will overwrite the data. Then we will talk about the property of the database. The property of the database mainly includes its security protection and submission restrictions. First, let's take a look at its security protection. Security protection is enabled by default. Of course, you are free to set a user's update permission. For example, you can update any record here, or you can only update the records submitted by yourself, or all records cannot be updated. We also provide two kinds of permissions for the same deletion. One is that all records cannot be deleted, and the other is that you can only delete the data submitted by yourself. Here, we highly recommend that you keep such a condition that all records cannot be deleted, because database deletion is a very heavy action. If the data is really deleted, it should be restored. It's very difficult to recover. Its next property is our limited submission condition, which is closed by default. You can turn it on. After opening it, we can set a start time, end time, submission interval, and submission times of each person, as well as the number of submission times of each person per day, and the total number of submitted items in total, and the total number of submitted items per day. For example, we only allow users to submit the information of punching card once a day, and then participate in activities every day. We can allow each of them to participate in more or less times, which can be done in this way. When we make a series of application like lottery, we often use such a limited submission condition. Then finally, we will tell you about our preview database and production database. In HeCode, the preview database and production database are completely independent. Only after rebuild can we form a build database, and the build database is empty by default. Of course, when we have a data build, we can click a button called Synchronization Preview Database, which can synchronize our preview database and the production database with one button. So, some students often say after finishing the build application, "Why I have no data?" That is probably because when your application is built, the read is the production database. The production database is empty by default, so it will feel that there is no data. The purpose of doing this is to complete a separation of our test environment and production environment database. That's all the content of this section. Thank you for watching.